He arrived at the Emergency Air Medical Center wearing a cargo pilot's jacket. Asking about the impossible rescue mission, the doctors laughed at him, calling security. But when they heard what he said about saving the trapped scientist, they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The Alaskan winter howled against the reinforced windows of Anchorage Emergency Air Medical Center. That January morning when Jacob Whitmore pushed through the operations entrance, with frost still clinging to his beard. At 44, he moved with the deliberate calm of someone who'd learned to conserve energy in extreme conditions, to never waste motion when every calorie might mean the difference between life and death. His cargo pilot jacket was worn and patched, the name tag reading simply Jake, because people who flew freight didn't merit the respect given to those who flew lives. He carried a thermos of black coffee and kept his eyes forward as he walked through hallways, where he'd once been a legend, where his name had been spoken with reverence, where awards with his face on them still hung on walls he couldn't bear to look at. The Emergency Operations Center vibrated with controlled crisis. The most elite air rescue physicians in Alaska had assembled around the tactical display, their faces grim, as they studied an impossible situation, a research station 400 miles into the Arctic, 6 scientists trapped by a Category 5 polar storm, 1 scientist doctor. Sarah Chen, climatologist, 32 years old, had suffered a ruptured cerebral aneurysm and had maybe for hours before the hematoma killed her. The storm made helicopter insertion impossible. Fixed wing couldn't land on the ice in these conditions. And even if they could reach her, performing emergency brain surgery at -40 degrees Fahrenheit in hurricane-force winds with limited equipment was medically impossible. Every physician consulted had said the same thing: she would die. And there was nothing anyone could do. The emergency was beyond medicine's reach. Coffees in the break room. Pilot, doctor. Craig Henderson didn't look up from the weather display as Jake passed near the planning table. At 52, Henderson commanded air rescue medicine in Alaska like a general commanded troops. His reputation built on successful missions, calculated risks, and an ego that couldn't tolerate anything less than perfect outcomes. His flight suit was immaculate, his posture radiating authority. "Just dropping off supplies, Doctor." "Henderson," Jake said quietly, adjusting his grip on the thermos. "We don't need cargo pilots in the operations center. This is a medical crisis, not a freight delivery." Henderson finally glanced at him, his expression mixing irritation with dismissal. "Actually, you shouldn't even be in this building. Cargo operations are in the East Hangar, Doctor." Amanda Foster looked up from her tablet, her 40-year-old face sharp with competitive intensity. "Let him stay, Craig. Maybe he can learn something about what real emergency medicine looks like. Though I doubt a freight pilot would understand the complexity." Complexity. Captain Derek Stone snorted from his position near the flight planning desk. The 55-year-old operations chief had spent 30 years in military aviation and didn't hide his disdain for pilots who'd never faced combat. Try impossibility. We're talking about reaching a research station in a Category 5 storm. Even our best pilots won't fly in these conditions. Paramedic Chief Lisa Morgan paced near the radio station, her anxiety visible. At 48, she'd run emergency medical operations for 15 years and had never lost a patient she'd personally transported. The thought of leaving someone to die was eating her alive. Sarah Chen has 2 children, ages 4 and 6. Her husband is flying up from Seattle right now. What do I tell him? "Sorry, we decided your wife's life isn't worth trying for." "We're not deciding that," Henderson said firmly. "We're acknowledging reality. You can't fly in a Category 5 Arctic storm. The aircraft would be torn apart. Sometimes we face situations we can't overcome, Lisa. This is one of those times." Jake stood near the wall, forgotten, invisible. But his eyes were fixed on the tactical display, the research station's coordinates, the weather patterns, the estimated time until Chen's hematoma caused fatal brain herniation. He'd seen this before. Different location, different patients, but the same impossible mathematics of distance, time, and mortality. "There's a window," he said quietly. Silence dropped over the room. Henderson turned slowly. "Excuse me." "A weather window. Between storm cells. Starting at 1400 hours. 4 hours. Narrow, but flyable for someone with experience. Foster laughed. A weather window. How insightful. Did you learn that from flying boxes of supplies? We have actual meteorologists who've been studying this storm for 12 hours. If there was a window, we'd know about it. Check the satellite data from the NOAA Arctic Station, Jake said. The pressure differential suggests. The pressure differential. Stone stood up, his voice mocking. Listen to the cargo pilot talking about meteorology. What's next? You going to explain aerodynamics to me? I've been flying in Alaska for 30 years, and I'm telling you that storm is suicide. Then it's good I'm not asking you to fly it, Jake said evenly. The room went very quiet. Henderson's face flushed red. Listen carefully, pilot Henderson said, his voice cold. This is a medical operation, not a cargo run. We don't need cowboys with hero complexes getting people killed. We especially don't need. He paused, recognition dawning in his eyes. Wait. Whitmore. Jacob Whitmore. You're the coward from Afghanistan. The one who let soldiers die. Jake's hands tightened on his thermos. 10 years. 10 years since that day, and it still followed him like a shadow. I know who you are, Foster added, her voice sharp. There was a whole investigation. You were supposed to evacuate 12 wounded soldiers, and died because you made the wrong decisions. The military court found you negligent. He didn't just make wrong decisions, Stone said. He panicked, froze up, chose the wrong patients to treat while the critical ones died. That's not a doctor, that's a killer with a medical degree. I heard, Morgan said quietly, that you had to choose between treating a general's son and 3 enlisted men. And you chose the enlisted men, and the general's son died. And the general made sure you paid for it. That's not, Jake started, but Henderson cut him off. What happened is that you're a disgraced former doctor who now flies cargo because no hospital will trust you with patients. And you think you can walk into my operations center and offer advice on an emergency medical mission? Henderson's voice rose. You're not a doctor anymore, Whitmore. You're a pilot. Barely that. And you have no place in this conversation. Jake met Henderson's eyes, saw the certainty there, the contempt, the same look the court-martial board had given him, the same look the families of the dead had given him, the same look his own face showed him in the mirror every morning. But he also saw the tactical display, saw Sarah Chen's medical data, saw the clock counting down to her death. You're right, he said quietly. I'm not a doctor anymore. But I know how to reach that station, and I know how to keep that woman alive long enough to get her to a hospital. And if you're willing to listen for 2 minutes, I can tell you exactly how. Security, Henderson called. Escort MR. Whitmore out of the operations center. Wait. The voice came from the doorway. Colonel Henry Morrison, retired, stepped into the room. At 68, he still carried himself like the military commander he'd been. His presence commanding immediate attention. Let him speak. Colonel Morrison, Henderson said carefully. The colonel consulted for FEMA on disaster medicine and had connections throughout the emergency medical community. With respect, this is an active medical crisis. We don't have time for the man who saved 8 lives under conditions that would have killed most people, for the physician who performed battlefield surgery while under enemy fire, for the doctor who was court-martialed by a corrupt general protecting his own incompetence. Morrison moved to stand beside Jake. Yes, Craig, we have time for him, because if anyone in this room can figure out how to save Sarah Chen, it's Jacob Whitmore. Henderson stared at Morrison, then at Jake, his expression wavering between authority and uncertainty. Colonel, I respect your service, but this man's record speaks for itself. For soldiers died under his care. For families buried their sons because he made the wrong call under pressure. No, Morrison said firmly. For soldiers died because a helicopter was shot down by enemy fire. 8 soldiers survived because Jacob Whitmore performed triage miracles while the aircraft was literally being torn apart around him. I was there, Craig. I saw what he did. I saw the impossible choices he made. And I saw a corrupt general destroy a good man's career because his incompetent son was one of the casualties. That's not what the court-martial determined, Foster said. The court-martial was a sham designed to protect a general who'd sent his son into combat unprepared and wanted someone to blame when the inevitable happened. Morrison's voice was steel. I've spent 10 years collecting evidence that proves it. Evidence that shows Jacob made every correct decision possible given impossible circumstances. Evidence that the military refused to consider because it was politically inconvenient. Jake closed his eyes. He'd never asked Morrison to fight for him. Never wanted anyone to waste their time defending someone who couldn't even defend himself. But hearing it now, in front of these people who looked at him with such contempt, something tight in his chest loosened slightly. Even if that's true, Stone said, it doesn't change the fact that he hasn't practiced medicine in 10 years. He's been flying cargo boxes, supplies, not people, not emergencies. Why would we trust him with a critical rescue? Because I've been studying that weather system for the last 3 hours, Jake said quietly. Because I know every mile of terrain between here and that research station. Because I've landed in worse conditions than what's coming in that window. And because, he paused, looked at the photo of Sarah Chen on the display. Young, smiling. Alive. Because that woman doesn't deserve to die while we stand here arguing about my past. Fine, Henderson said sharply. You want to contribute? Tell us your miraculous plan. How exactly do you propose we reach a station 400 miles into the Arctic? During a polar storm? Jake moved to the tactical display, his fingers tracing routes across the map. The storm is rotating clockwise. The eye wall is moving northeast at 40 knots. At 1400 hours, there'll be a gap in the southern quadrant approximately for hours of reduced winds and improved visibility. Not perfect conditions, but flyable. Flyable in what? Foster demanded. Our helicopters don't have the range for a 400-mile round trip, and fixed-wing aircraft can't land on that ice shelf in high winds. The Twin Otter can. Modified landing gear, reinforced struts, designed for ice landings in extreme conditions. I've landed it at that exact station twice before. Jake pulled up specifications on the screen. Range, 600 miles with auxiliary tanks. Cruise speed, 140 knots. We'd have 90 minutes at the station before the next cell hits. 90 minutes to extract a critical patient with a brain hemorrhage, Morgan said slowly. Is that even possible? If we stabilize her first, yes. The research station has a medical module with basic equipment. We can initiate therapeutic hypothermia, use the cold environment to slow the hematoma progression. That buys us time to transport her back here where Dr. Henderson can perform the actual surgery in a proper operating room. Henderson was studying the weather data now, his expression thoughtful despite his obvious reluctance. Therapeutic hypothermia in Arctic conditions. That's actually medically sound. Risky, but sound. It's insane, Stone said. You're talking about deliberately cooling a patient who's already in sub-zero temperatures. One mistake and you kill her from hypothermia instead of the hemorrhage. Not if it's controlled, Jake said. Core temperature reduced to 32 degrees Celsius. Monitored continuously. The cold slows metabolic processes, reduces intracranial pressure, gives us the time we need for transport. I've done it before. When? Foster challenged. When have you ever performed therapeutic hypothermia in Arctic conditions? Jake was quiet for a moment. The memories were sharp, painful. Afghanistan. The downed helicopter. The freezing desert night. 12 wounded soldiers and only enough medical supplies for 6. The impossible mathematics of triage. The cold he'd used as a tool to keep the most critical patients alive until rescue arrived. Afghanistan, he said quietly. After the helicopter went down, we were in the mountains. Temperature dropped to -20. I used the cold to preserve 3 soldiers with massive internal bleeding, slowed their circulation just enough to prevent them from bleeding out before the rescue birds arrived. All 3 survived, and for didn't, Foster shot back. For didn't, Jake agreed, his voice level. Because they were already dead or dying when we crashed. Because I had to choose between spending precious time on patients who had 0 chance of survival versus focusing on the 8 who might make it if I worked fast enough. I made the calls no one should have to make. I lived with the consequences, and I've spent every day since then learning to be better at impossible choices. The room fell silent. Even Foster looked uncomfortable. Morrison stepped forward. Jacob saved 8 men that night who should have died. He performed amputations, emergency thoracotomies, and vascular repairs with nothing but a basic field kit and a headlamp, in sub-zero temperatures, under sporadic enemy fire, for 9 hours until rescue arrived. The general whose son died called him a coward. I call him the finest battlefield surgeon I ever served with. That's a touching story, Henderson said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. But this isn't a battlefield. This is civilian emergency medicine. We have protocols, standards, insurance concerns. I can't just authorize a rogue mission based on one man's word that he can handle it. Then don't authorize it based on my word, Jake said. Check the weather data. Confirm the window exists. If your meteorologists say I'm wrong, I'll walk out of here and never come back. But if I'm right, if that window is real, then you have a choice. Let Sarah Chen die because you're too proud to trust someone with a damaged reputation, or give her a chance. Henderson looked at Foster, then at Stone, then at Morgan. Lisa, pull up the NOAA Arctic weather data. Let's see if this window actually exists. Morgan moved to her console, fingers flying across the keyboard. Long seconds passed. The room held its breath. He's right, Morgan said finally, her voice filled with disbelief. There's a gap forming in the southern quadrant. Winds dropping from 80 knots to 35. Visibility improving from 0 to 2 miles. Duration, approximately 4 hours starting at 1400 hours. How did our meteorologists miss that? Stone demanded. Because they were looking at the macro pattern, not the micro variations, Jake said. And because I've been flying these storms for 10 years. You learn to see things in the data that desk analysts miss. Foster was studying the weather display now, her competitive nature warring with her skepticism. Even if the weather window exists, you'd still need a medical team. Someone who can manage the patient during transport. Someone who can handle the therapeutic hypothermia protocol. I can handle it, Jake said. You're not a licensed physician anymore, Henderson reminded him. Your medical credentials were revoked after the court-martial. Legally, you can't practice medicine. Then reinstate them. Emergency authorization. You have that authority as medical director. Do you have any idea what you're asking? If this goes wrong, if that woman dies, it's my license on the line. My reputation. My career. Yes, Jake said simply. I'm asking you to risk your career to save a life. The same thing I did 10 years ago. The same thing that cost me everything. Henderson looked at him for a long moment. Jake could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Risk versus reward. Career versus conscience. The safe choice versus the right choice. This is crazy, Foster muttered. Completely insane, Stone agreed. But Morgan was looking at the photo of Sarah Chen again. At the notes about her 2 children. At the countdown timer showing 3 hours and 47 minutes until estimated fatality. I'll go with him, Morgan said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Lisa, you can't be serious, Henderson said. I'm completely serious. If Jake can get us to that station, I can manage the patient during transport. I've handled critical cases in helicopters during storms. I can do this. She looked at Jake. If you're willing to fly it, I'm willing to ride with you. You realize, Stone said carefully, that if this goes wrong, you'll probably both die. That storm could close in faster than predicted. The aircraft could fail. 1,000 things could go wrong. And if we do nothing, Morgan said, Sarah Chen definitely dies. Those are the options. Certain death versus a chance. I choose the chance. Jake felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Not hope, exactly. More like purpose. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he could do the thing he'd been trained to do. Save a life. Make the impossible possible. We'll need to prep the Twin Otter, he said. Full cold weather kit. Medical supplies. Emergency backup systems. We have, he checked his watch, 3 hours before the window opens. You're all insane, Foster said, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite contempt anymore. Maybe respect, maybe fear, maybe both. Henderson stood very still, his jaw working. The room waited. This was his call, his responsibility, his career on the line. Do it, he said finally. Prep the aircraft. I'll authorize emergency medical credentials for Whitmore. But Jake, his voice hardened. If you screw this up, if that woman dies because you made the wrong call, I will personally make sure you never fly again. Not cargo, not passengers, nothing. Are we clear? Clear, Jake said. Then go. You've got 3 hours to prepare for an impossible mission. Henderson turned back to his displays. God help us all. The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Jake moved through the aircraft hangar with the focused efficiency of someone who'd prepared for missions like this 1,000 times before. The Twin Otter sat in the maintenance bay, a rugged, high-wing aircraft designed for extreme conditions. It looked like a workhorse, not a medical transport, but Jake knew its capabilities better than he knew his own heartbeat. You're really doing this? Jake turned to find a young flight mechanic watching him, eyes wide. The kid couldn't be more than 25, fresh-faced and eager. His name tag read Danny Miller. Yeah, Jake said simply, continuing his pre-flight inspection. I heard what they said about you. About Afghanistan. Danny hesitated. Is it true? Did you really save 8 guys? I did my job. They called you a coward. Said you let people die. Jake's hands stilled on the landing gear strut. Some people died. That's true. I made choices. Some of them worked. Some of them didn't. That's how triage works. But you saved the ones you could save. I tried to. Jake moved to check the auxiliary fuel tanks. Now I'm trying to save someone else. You going to help me prep this bird or keep asking questions? Danny grinned. I'm going to help. What do you need? For the next 90 minutes, they worked together. Danny proved to be competent and quick, understanding aircraft systems with the intuition of someone who'd been born around planes. They installed the medical equipment Morgan had specified: portable monitors for systems, oxygen, the therapeutic hypothermia apparatus. They triple-checked the cold weather gear, the emergency supplies, the backup communication systems. Fuel load is maxed, Danny reported. You'll have about 40 minutes of reserve after you account for the round trip and station time. 40 minutes isn't much margin. It's what you've got. Weather closes in early. You'll need every second of it. Danny handed Jake the final systems checklist. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this? I mean, after everything that happened to you. After they destroyed your career and sent you to prison. Why risk it all again for people who don't even respect you? Jake looked at the young mechanic, saw the genuine curiosity there, not judgment. Because a woman is dying, and I have the skills to maybe save her. That's the only reason that matters. Even though they'll probably blame you if it goes wrong, especially then. Because if I don't try, I'll know for certain that I could have done something and chose not to. That's a weight I can't carry. I've already got enough of those. Danny nodded slowly. My uncle was in the Marines, served in Afghanistan. He says the real heroes aren't the ones who never make mistakes, they're the ones who keep showing up after the worst day of their lives. Says courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the thing even when you're terrified. Your uncle sounds smart. He's dead. Died in Helmand Province. Danny's voice was quiet, but before he died, he wrote me a letter. Said to always give people second chances, because sometimes the best people are the ones who've already failed once and learned from it. Jake put a hand on the kid's shoulder. I'm sorry about your uncle. Me too, but I think he'd like what you're doing today. Going back into the fire even after you got burned. Danny held out his hand. Good luck, Doctor. Whitmore. Bring her home safe. They shook hands. Jake felt the kid's grip, firm and confident. Maybe there was still hope in the world. Maybe not everyone had given up on second chances. Morgan arrived at the hangar carrying 2 large equipment cases and wearing full Arctic survival gear. She looked small under all the insulation, but her eyes were determined. Medical supplies, she said, setting down the cases. Everything we need for patient stabilization and transport. I also brought emergency trauma supplies just in case things go wrong. Things might go very wrong, Jake warned her. That storm could shift faster than predicted. We could lose power. 1,000 variables. I know. I'm still going. She started loading the equipment into the aircraft. I've been doing this job for 15 years, Jake. I've seen people die because we didn't try, because the risk seemed too high or the conditions too dangerous. And every single one of those deaths haunts me. Sarah Chen isn't going to be one of them. Not if I can help it. Why do you trust me? You heard what they said. The accusations. The court-martial. Morgan stopped loading, turned to face him. I looked up your record. Not the court-martial that's public and everyone knows that story. I looked up your actual medical record. Your missions. Your saves. Do you know how many lives you saved in 4 years of combat medicine? I never counted. 237 documented saves. 237 people who would have died without your intervention. You had a 94% survival rate on patients who reached you alive. 94%. In a war zone. Under fire. With limited supplies. Her voice was intense. The best civilian trauma centers in America run about 82%. You were doing better than that while people were shooting at you. Jake looked away. The 4 who died were already dying. I read the after-action reports. All 4 had injuries incompatible with survival. Multiple organ destruction. Catastrophic blood loss. Even in a fully equipped hospital, they wouldn't have made it. But you spent precious time on them anyway, trying, while 8 other patients with survivable injuries waited. Some people would call that poor triage. I call it being human, refusing to give up even when the math says it's hopeless. The court-martial didn't see it that way. The court-martial was politics. I know that. Colonel Morrison knows that. And deep down, even Henderson knows that. He's just scared. Scared of taking risks. Scared of being wrong. Scared of ending up like you destroyed for trying to do the right thing. Jake finished his pre-flight inspection, signed off on the paperwork. We launch in 40 minutes. Weather window opens at 1400 hours. You should eat something now. Once we're in the air, there won't be time. Already ate. You? Not hungry. When's the last time you ate? Jake had to think about it. Yesterday. The day before. Time had a way of blurring when you lived alone. When eating was just another task to check off a list. I'll eat after. When this is done. Morgan pulled a protein bar from her pocket, tossed it to him. Eat now. I need you sharp, not passing out from low blood sugar at 10,000 feet. He caught the bar, managed a small smile. Yes, Mum. They ate in comfortable silence, to professionals preparing for an impossible mission. Around them, the hangar bustled with activity. Other pilots watched, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, some with barely concealed hope that Jake would fail and prove they'd been right to write him off. Jake, Morrison's voice came from the hangar entrance. The colonel walked over, carrying a small case. He looked older in the harsh hangar lighting, the years of military service written in the lines of his face. I brought something for you. Morrison opened the case. Inside was a medical kit, not the standard emergency supplies, but something else. Surgical instruments. High grade. Sterile sealed. The kind of equipment a combat surgeon would carry. Where did you get this? Jake asked, recognizing the kit immediately. It was military issue, but not standard. Custom. Personal. It was your brother's. Matthew's. Morrison's voice was gentle. He carried it on every mission after you were court-martialed. Said he was flying for both of you. When he died, his effects came to me. I've been holding onto this, waiting for the right time to give it to you. Jake's hands trembled as he touched the case. Matthew. His twin brother. The other half of his soul. The man who'd defended Jake's honor, even when Jake couldn't defend himself. Who died on a medical evacuation mission, trying to prove that the Whitmore name still meant something in military medicine. He never believed the charges, Morrison said quietly. Never for a second. He knew you made the right calls. He spent a year trying to get the case reopened, trying to find evidence. That's what got him killed. He was flying a mission in hostile territory, trying to reach a source who claimed to have information about the general's cover-up. The helicopter was ambushed. Matthew and 3 others died. Jake couldn't speak. The guilt was a physical weight in his chest. Matthew had died defending him. Died trying to clear a name that maybe didn't deserve clearing. Died because Jake had made choices that led to consequences that spiraled out of control. It wasn't your fault, Morrison said, reading his expression. Matthew made his own choices. He believed in truth, in justice, in his brother. That's why he kept fighting. And that's why I'm giving you this now, because you're about to do what Matthew would have done. Risk everything to save someone who needs saving. Fly into danger because it's right, not because it's safe. Jake took the medical kit, held it carefully. It smelled like his brother leather and antiseptic, and the faint scent of the cologne Matthew always wore. "I can't use this. I'm not licensed. Henderson gave me emergency authorization, but it's limited. I'm supposed to stabilize and transport only. Plans change. Emergencies happen. If you need to do more, if Sarah Chen's life depends on it, you'll have the tools." Morrison gripped Jake's shoulder. "Your brother believed you were the finest surgeon he ever knew. Prove him right. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong call again? Then you fail having tried. That's all anyone can ask. But Jake, you won't fail. I've seen you work under conditions that would break most people. You have instincts that can't be taught. Trust them. Trust yourself the way Matthew trusted you." Morgan approached, checking her watch. 20 minutes to lunch. "We should board." Jake nodded, secured Matthew's medical kit with the other equipment. The weight of it felt right, like having his brother with him. One more time, on one more impossible mission. Henderson appeared at the hangar entrance with Foster and Stone. They looked grim, official, like they were attending a funeral. "Final briefing," Henderson called out. "Everyone to the planning table." They gathered around the tactical display. The weather system pulsed on the screen, a massive spiral of death and cold rotating across the Arctic. "The window exists," Henderson said without preamble. "Our meteorologists confirm Whitmore's analysis. You'll have approximately 4 hours of reduced winds and improved visibility." But his voice hardened. "The margin for error is 0. If you're not back before the next cell hits, you'll be trapped, and we won't be able to mount a rescue. You'll die out there along with your patient." "Understood," Jake said. "The flight plan is filed. You'll maintain radio contact throughout. Any deviation from plan, any indication of trouble, I'm ordering you to abort and return immediately. The patient's life isn't worth throwing away to more. Clear?" "Clear." Foster stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "I've been reviewing Sarah Chen's medical data. The hematoma is expanding faster than initially estimated. She has maybe 3 hours, not 4. If you're going to do this, you need to move fast." "How fast is the expansion?" Morgan asked. 0.2 milliliters per hour. At that rate, she'll have fatal brain herniation before you can get her back here. Foster looked at Jake. "You'll need to slow it down. The therapeutic hypothermia has to work perfectly. No mistakes." "It'll work," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. Stone crossed his arms. "I still think this is suicide. But if you're determined to go, at least follow proper protocols. Emergency beacon active at all times. Position reports every 15 minutes. If you lose communications, we'll assume you're down and won't waste resources looking for you. Cheerful as always, Derek," Morgan muttered. "I'm being realistic. That's my job." But Stone's expression softened slightly. "Good luck anyway. Bring our people home." Henderson handed Jake a radio. "Direct line to the operations center. I'll be monitoring personally. And Jake," he paused, seemed to struggle with something. "I hope you prove me wrong. About everything. I hope you come back with that woman alive and make me look like a fool for doubting you. If I do, you buying the first round?" Henderson almost smiled. "Deal." The countdown clock showed 15 minutes. Jake and Morgan performed final equipment checks, tested the communication systems, verified the medical supplies. Danny did one last walk-around inspection of the Twin Otter, checking every rivet, every seal, every system. "She's ready," Danny reported. "Best shape she's been in since we bought her. You've got a good bird, Dr. Whitmore. She'll get you there and back. Thanks, Danny, for everything." The young mechanic saluted a military gesture that felt both awkward and sincere. "Fly safe, sir. And when you get back, I want to hear all about it." Jake climbed into the cockpit, Morgan settling into the co-pilot seat. The instruments glowed in the dim light, familiar and comforting. He'd flown this aircraft hundreds of times, knew every quirk, every sound, every vibration. This was where he felt most at home in the air, in control, flying toward something instead of running away. "Pre-flight checklist," he said, his hands moving across the controls. "Fuel, full," Morgan read from the list. "Oxygen, full. Medical systems, online. Communications, check. Heaters, operational. De-icing, functional. Engine start. The Twin Otter's engines coughed, caught, roared to life. The propellers spun, creating a wind that rattled the hangar doors. Jake felt the aircraft come alive beneath him, felt the power, the potential, the promise of flight. Tower. This is Air Medical 73 requesting clearance for emergency medical evacuation mission to Arctic Research Station Delta. Air Medical 73, Tower. You are cleared for departure runway 27. Winds variable at 30 knots. Current temperature -15 Fahrenheit. Ceiling 8,000 feet. Weather window confirmed. Duration estimated for hours. Godspeed, 7-3. Roger, Tower. 7-3 departing. Jake released the brakes, throttled up, felt the Twin Otter surge forward. They rolled out of the hangar into the brutal Alaskan wind, the aircraft shuddering but stable. The runway stretched ahead, snow-covered and dangerous, but Jake had landed and taken off in worse. Ready? He asked Morgan. She gripped the armrest, but her voice was steady. Ready. Full throttle. The engines screamed. The Twin Otter accelerated. Faster, faster, the runway blurring beneath them. Jake felt the moment, that perfect instant when the aircraft wanted to fly and pulled back on the yoke. They lifted. The ground fell away. And for the first time in 10 years, Dr. Jacob Whitmore was flying a medical mission again. Below them, Anchorage shrank to a collection of lights and buildings. Ahead, the Arctic waited 400 miles of frozen wilderness, hurricane-force winds, and a woman dying in a research station that might as well be on another planet. Henderson, this is 7-3, Jake said into the radio. We're airborne. Time to station, 2 hours 15 minutes. Commencing emergency medical evacuation. Roger, 7-3. We'll be tracking your progress. Be careful out there. Careful wasn't in the job description, Jake replied. 7-3 out. Morgan was checking the medical equipment, preparing for what came next. How are you feeling? Terrified. You? Same. But also, she paused, searching for words. Also, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like this is what all the training was for. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Jake adjusted their heading, pointing the nose toward the distant Arctic. Welcome to emergency medicine, Lisa, where the impossible is just another Tuesday. She laughed despite the tension. You've done this before. Flown into impossible situations. How do you deal with the fear? You don't deal with it. You carry it. Fear means you understand the stakes. Means you're taking it seriously. The dangerous people are the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who make stupid mistakes. He checked the weather radar, saw the massive storm system ahead. But you can't let fear paralyze you. You acknowledge it, then you do the job anyway. Matthew felt that way too, didn't he? Your brother. Jake was quiet for a moment. Yeah. He used to say that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was fear that had said its prayers and gotten to work anyway. I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you. He always respected people who ran toward danger instead of away from it. Jake's voice roughened. He died doing that. Running toward danger because someone needed help. I sometimes wonder if I'd been there, if I could have saved him. You can't think like that. You'll drive yourself crazy with what-ifs. Too late. I've been crazy for 10 years. They flew in silence for a while, the Twin Otter's engines a steady roar, the landscape below transitioning from civilization to wilderness. Trees gave way to tundra. Tundra gave way to ice. The temperature continued to drop -20, -30, -35. Outside, the world was a monochrome nightmare of white and gray. Jake. Morgan's voice was uncertain. On the horizon. Is that? He looked. Saw what she saw. A wall of clouds rising from the earth to the stratosphere, dark and malevolent and moving. The storm. The Category 5 monster that had trapped 6 scientists and was slowly killing Sarah Chen. That's it, Jake confirmed. That's what we're flying into. It looks like the end of the world. It's not the end. Just a challenge. He adjusted their altitude, climbing to get above some of the turbulence. In 30 minutes, we'll be in that weather window. And then we'll see if I'm as good as I used to be. Morgan was checking Sarah Chen's medical data, transmitted from the research station. Vitals are declining. Heart rate elevated. Blood pressure unstable. Jake, I don't think she has 3 hours. I think she has maybe 2. Then we fly faster. Can this aircraft go faster? It can if I push it. Jake increased throttle, felt the Twin Otter respond. The engines strained, the airframe shook, but they accelerated. Airspeed climbed 140 knots, 150, 160. Beyond the manufacturer's specifications, but still within safety margins. Barely. "Henderson, this is 7-3, Jake radioed. Patient's condition is deteriorating faster than estimated. We're increasing speed. New ETA, 1 hour 45 minutes. 7-3, be advised you're exceeding normal cruise speed. Fuel consumption will increase. Acknowledged. We'll manage. 7-3 out." Morgan looked at the fuel gauges. "We're burning through our reserve. We'll make it. We have to. And if we don't?" Jake didn't answer, because the answer was simple. If they didn't make it, 3 people would die instead of 1. Him, Morgan, and Sarah Chen. The mathematics of rescue were brutal. Sometimes you had to risk lives to save lives. Sometimes the equation didn't balance. Sometimes you made the call and lived with the consequences. Just like Afghanistan. Just like the choice that had destroyed him. But this time he was going to get it right. The weather window appeared exactly as Jake had predicted, a gap in the maelstrom, where the wind dropped from deadly to merely dangerous. The Twin Otter plunged through turbulence that would have terrified most pilots. But Jake's hands were steady on the controls, making constant micro-adjustments to keep them stable. "There," Morgan pointed through the windscreen. "Is that it?" Through the driving snow, Jake could see lights. The research station, a cluster of prefabricated modules arranged in a star pattern, partially buried in snow drifts, looking impossibly small and fragile against the infinite white wastelands surrounding it. "That's it. Arctic Research Station Delta. Home to 6 scientists who are about to have a very interesting day." Jake circled the station once, assessing the landing zone. The ice shelf looked solid enough, but visibility was poor and the wind was still gusting at 35 knots. One miscalculation, and they'd cartwheel across the ice, destroying the aircraft and killing everyone aboard. "Station Delta, this is Air Medical 7-3 on final approach. Requesting wind conditions and surface status." A crackling voice responded, male, young, stressed. 7-3, this is Dr. Marcus Webb at Station Delta. We've been expecting you. Winds northeast at 35, gusting to 45. Surface is hardpack ice, some drift accumulation. Drive. Chen's condition is critical. Please hurry. Roger, Delta. Beginning approach now. Have your team ready to load the patient immediately upon landing. We have limited time on the ground. Jake lined up the approach, fighting the crosswind that wanted to push them off course. The ice shelf rushed up to meet them. He worked the controls with the precision of a surgeon, which, he supposed, he technically was again, at least for today. The skis touched down, bounced once, settled. They were sliding across the ice at 80 knots, slowing. Jake applied reverse thrust, felt the aircraft shudder and decelerate. 50 knots. 30, 20. 10. They stopped 300 yards from the research station. The engines still running to keep the heaters operational. Not bad, Morgan said, her knuckles white from gripping the armrest. Not good either. We're burning fuel just sitting here. Let's move. They emerged from the aircraft into a world of white noise and stinging cold. The wind was a physical force, trying to knock them over, freezing any exposed skin within seconds. Jake had experienced extreme cold before: Afghanistan's mountain winters, Arctic training exercises, but this was different. This was cold that wanted to kill you, cold that found every gap in your clothing, every weakness in your resolve. The research station's emergency door opened and figures emerged, people in extreme cold weather gear, indistinguishable from each other. They were dragging a sled with what looked like a body bag on it. "Dr. Whitmore," one of them shouted over the wind. Young male voice, probably Webb. "Thank God you're here. We've got Dr. Chen stabilized as much as we can, but she's fading fast." Jake and Morgan reached the sled, unzipped the thermal bag. Inside was Sarah Chen, a small woman, maybe 5'2", her face gray and her breathing shallow. Morgan immediately pulled out her medical kit, began checking vitals. "Pulse 120 and weak," Morgan reported. "Blood pressure 70/40. She's in shock. Jake, we need to move now." "What happened?" Jake asked Webb as they began moving the sled toward the aircraft. She collapsed during her shift monitoring the ice cores. By the time we found her, she was unconscious. We're all scientists here, climatologists, geologists, nobody with medical training beyond basic first aid. We've been trying to keep her warm, keep her comfortable, but Webb's voice cracked. We don't know what to do. You did enough. You kept her alive until we got here. Jake helped load the sled into the Twin Otter's cargo area. Everyone else okay? The rest of the team is fine. Just scared. We've never had a medical emergency like this before. They secured Sarah Chen in the aircraft, Morgan connecting her to the portable monitors. The numbers weren't good: declining blood pressure, increasing heart rate, the classic signs of intracranial pressure building toward a fatal threshold. Jake, Morgan said quietly, we need to start the hypothermia protocol now. She won't survive the flight back without it. Agreed. Jake turned to Webb. Your medical module, is it heated? Yes, about 60 degrees. We've got basic supplies there too. Show me. Fast. They crossed the 100 yards to the medical module, fighting the wind every step. Inside, it was cramped, but warm and surprisingly well equipped for a remote research station. Jake saw for supplies, monitors, even a small surgical kit. This will work, he said. Morgan, prep the hypothermia setup. We'll do it here where we have space and power. Once she's stabilized, we transport. That'll use up our ground time, Morgan warned. I know, but if we try to transport her like this, she'll die en route. We need to buy her time. For the next 20 minutes, they worked with the focused intensity of an emergency room team. Morgan, established for access, began pushing fluids to stabilize blood pressure. Jake carefully initiated the cooling protocol, wrapping Sarah Chen in specialized cooling blankets, monitoring her core temperature with obsessive precision. 35 degrees, Morgan read. From the thermometer, 34, 33, hold at 32, Jake ordered. That's our target. Cold enough to slow the intracranial pressure, warm enough to avoid cardiac complications. Webb and two other scientists watched in fascination and horror. You're deliberately making her colder? In the Arctic? Controlled hypothermia, Jake explained, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Her brain is swelling from the hemorrhage. The cold slows her metabolism, reduces the swelling, buys us time. It's counterintuitive, but it works. 30.5, Morgan announced, holding steady. Heart rate dropping to 90. Blood pressure stabilizing at 85/50. Jake checked his watch. They'd been on the ground for 38 minutes. The weather window was closing. He could hear the wind outside increasing in intensity. We need to move, he said. Help me get her back to the aircraft. They loaded Sarah Chen into the Twin Otter, secured her in the makeshift medical bay Morgan had prepared. The monitors showed stable vitals, not good, but stable. It would have to be enough. Thank you, Webb said, gripping Jake's hand. You gave her a chance. That's all we could ask for. Thank me when she's in surgery at Anchorage. Jake climbed into the cockpit, began the pre-flight checklist. Get inside and seal that door. Next storm cell hits in about 90 minutes. You don't want to be outside for that. The scientists retreated to their modules. Jake fired up the engines, felt the aircraft come alive around him. Morgan was in the back with the patient, surrounded by beeping monitors and for bags. How's she doing? Jake called back. Stable for now. But Jake, I'm seeing signs of increased intracranial pressure again. The hypothermia is helping, but it's not enough. She needs surgery. Soon. Henderson, this is 7-3. We have the patient. Beginning return flight. At a 1 hour 50 minutes. 7-3, Henderson. Be advised, weather conditions are deteriorating faster than predicted. You're cutting it very close. Story of my life. 7-3 out. Jake released the brakes, began his takeoff run. The ice was more treacherous now, wind-swept and uneven. The Twin Otter bounced, shuddered, fought to gain speed. 60 knots, 70-80. The edge of the ice shelf was approaching fast. Beyond it was open water, deadly and dark. 90 knots. Jake pulled back on the yoke. The aircraft lifted sluggishly, heavy with fuel and passenger and equipment. They cleared the ice shelf with maybe 50 feet to spare, climbing into the gray-white chaos of the Arctic sky. We're airborne, Jake announced. Morgan, how's the patient? Still stable. temperature holding at 32 degrees. But Jake, we have a problem. What kind of problem? I'm seeing pupillary changes. Her left pupil is dilating. That means the pressure in her brain is increasing despite the hypothermia. She's herniating. Jake's blood went cold. Brain herniation was the final stage before death when pressure forced brain tissue through openings in the skull, cutting off blood flow, causing irreversible damage. Once it started, you had minutes, not hours. How long does she have? At this rate, maybe 30 minutes. 40 if we're lucky. Jake, she won't survive the flight back to Anchorage. She needs intervention now. What kind of intervention? Morgan was quiet for a long moment. She needs a burr hole. We need to drill through her skull and drain the hematoma. Release the pressure. It's the only way. Jake's hands tightened on the controls. A burr hole. Emergency neurosurgery. The kind of procedure that should be done in an operating room by a neurosurgeon, not in a bouncing aircraft by a disgraced doctor who hadn't practiced medicine in 10 years. I can't do that, he said. I'm not a neurosurgeon. I've never done a craniotomy. But you've done battlefield surgery. You've improvised procedures under impossible conditions. Jake, I've read your record. You've done things that shouldn't be possible. You can do this. And if I can't, if I make a mistake and kill her, then she dies. But she's dying anyway. At least this way she has a chance. Jake's mind raced through the options. Turn back to the research station? No, they didn't have the equipment for this procedure, and the weather was closing in. Continue to Anchorage? Sarah Chen would be dead before they arrived. Attempt the surgery here, in a flying aircraft, in Arctic conditions, with his hands that hadn't held a scalpel in 10 years? It was an impossible choice. Just like Afghanistan. Just like the choice he'd made that destroyed his life. Jake. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Somehow he'd tapped into their frequency. I know what you're thinking. I know you're afraid. But that woman doesn't have time for your fear. She needs the surgeon you used to be. The surgeon you still are. I can't. Yes, you can. Matthew believed you could. I believe you can. And somewhere deep down, you believe it too. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. Trust yourself. Jake looked at the fuel gauge. At the weather radar showing the storm closing in. At the altimeter reading 8,000 feet over an ocean that would kill them in minutes if they crashed. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was insane, that he should refuse, that attempting surgery in these conditions was suicide. But then he thought of Sarah Chen's children, 4 and 6 years old, waiting for their mother to come home. And he thought of Matthew, flying into danger because it was right. And he thought of the 8 soldiers he'd saved in Afghanistan, the ones who were alive today because he'd made impossible choices. Morgan, he said quietly, prep the patient for emergency cranial decompression. I'm putting us on autopilot and coming back there. Are you sure? No. But I'm doing it anyway. He engaged the autopilot, triple-checked the heading and altitude, then unbuckled and moved to the cargo area. The aircraft bounced and shuddered in the turbulence, making every step treacherous. Sarah Chen lay on the improvised surgical table, her face pale, her left pupil fully dilated now. Jake could see the signs: the Cushing's triad of increased pressure, decreased heart rate, irregular breathing. She was minutes from death. Morgan had Matthew's surgical kit open. The instruments gleamed under the LED lights, sterile, sharp, ready, waiting for hands that knew how to use them. Talk me through the procedure, Jake said, pulling on surgical gloves. Identify the hematoma location we know from the research station's imaging. It's left temporal. Mark the entry point. Sterilize. Use the manual drill to create a burr hole through the skull. Insert a small catheter. Drain the hematoma slowly to avoid rebound swelling. Monitor constantly. In a hospital, this takes an hour with multiple specialists. We don't have an hour. We have 10 minutes. Maybe less. Jake looked at Sarah Chen's face, thought about her children, about the choice he was about to make, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he picked up the surgical marker and began marking the entry point on her skull. Henderson, this is 7-3. We have a critical situation. Patient is actively herniating. I'm going to attempt an emergency burr hole procedure. Static point. Then Jake, you can't. You're not authorized. You're not trained. If she dies, she's already dying. Craig. This is her only chance. I can't authorize this. It's too risky. If something goes wrong, it's your license, your freedom, everything. I know. I'm doing it anyway. 7-3 out. Jake switched off the radio. He didn't need the distraction. Didn't need the doubt. He needed to focus on the only thing that mattered, the life in his hands. Scalpel, he said. Morgan handed him the blade. Jake felt the weight of it, the familiar balance. His hands remembered this. Even after 10 years, they remembered. He made the incision through the scalp, exposing the skull beneath. Blood welled up, but Morgan was there with suction and gauze. They worked together like they'd been doing this for years, reading each other's movements, anticipating needs. Manual drill, Jake said. The drill was simple, a hand-cranked tool that looked medieval, but was still used in emergency situations. Jake positioned it carefully over the marked spot, then began cranking. The bit cut through bone with a grinding sound that made Morgan wince. Almost through, Jake muttered. Keep suction ready. When I penetrate, we'll get blood flow. The drill broke through. Dark blood welled up from the opening, the hematoma draining under pressure. Jake quickly inserted a small catheter, allowing controlled drainage. Pressure's dropping, Morgan said, watching the monitors. Heart rate improving. Pupil starting to constrict. Jake, it's working. Jake kept his focus on the surgical site, monitoring the drainage carefully. Too fast and he could cause rebound swelling. Too slow and the pressure wouldn't relieve fast enough. It was a delicate balance, and he was performing it in a bouncing aircraft at 8,000 feet over the Arctic Ocean. Blood pressure stabilizing, Morgan reported. 85/55. 90/60. She's responding, Jake. Her pupils are equalizing. Jake allowed himself one breath of relief. Then he continued working, ensuring the drainage was complete, checking for signs of complication. 5 minutes. 10:15. Drainage is slowing, he said. I think we got it. Morgan, prepped to close. They worked together to close the incision, layer by layer. Jake's hands moved with the precision of muscle memory, sutures he could place in his sleep, techniques he'd used 1,000 times. It felt like coming home, like remembering who he used to be. Closure complete, he announced. Patient status? Vitals are stable and improving. Both pupils equal and reactive. Blood pressure holding at 95/65. Heart rate 78. Jake, I think you did it. I think you saved her. Jake looked at Sarah Chen's face, saw color returning to her cheeks, saw her breathing become more regular, saw life returning where death had been imminent. Don't celebrate yet, he said. We still need to get her to Anchorage for definitive care. But yeah, I think she's going to make it. He returned to the cockpit, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The autopilot had held their course perfectly. The weather ahead looked challenging but flyable. Fuel was low but sufficient. Henderson, this is 7-3. Procedure is complete. Patient has been successfully decompressed and is stable. Continuing to Anchorage. Long silence. Then, Jake, did you just perform brain surgery in a flying aircraft? Emergency cranial decompression. Technically different from full neurosurgery, but yes. That's Henderson's voice failed. That's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And also the most incredible. What's her status? Stable. Vitals improving. She'll need full neurosurgical care when we land, but she's going to survive the flight. Copy that. We're prepping the OR now. Drive. Patterson is our best neurosurgeon. He'll be standing by. Jake, you did good work. Really good work. Thank you, sir. 7-3 out. Morgan appeared in the cockpit doorway. She's resting comfortably. All vitals stable. Jake, what you just did, I've never seen anything like it. That was battlefield medicine at its finest. It was desperation medicine. But it worked, and that's what matters. Jake checked the fuel. We're going to be running on fumes when we land. Will we make it? Yes. Barely, but yes. We've come too far to fail now. They flew in silence for a while, the Twin Otter carrying its precious cargo through the Arctic sky. Behind them, the storm raged and closed the weather window they'd used. Ahead, Anchorage beckoned with its promise of hospitals and surgeons and safety. Jake, Morgan's voice was soft. Thank you for being brave enough to try, for trusting yourself when no one else would, for being the doctor Sarah Chen needed. Thank you for believing in me. for getting on this aircraft when everyone said it was suicide, for being the partner I needed. We make a good team. Yeah, we do. The radio crackled. 7-3, Anchorage Tower. We have you on radar. Emergency services are standing by. You're cleared for priority landing, any runway. Roger, Tower. 7-3 on final approach. Jake began the descent, the city lights of Anchorage spreading out below them. He'd left this morning as a disgraced cargo pilot. He was returning as something else. Something he'd thought he'd lost forever. A doctor. A surgeon. Someone who saved lives. The landing was smooth despite the low fuel and exhaustion. The moment they touched down, emergency vehicles surrounded them, ambulances, fire trucks, medical teams. Dr. Patterson and his neurosurgical team were already in hazmat suits, ready to take over Sarah Chen's care. They transferred her carefully from the aircraft to the ambulance. Patterson examined the burr hole Jake had created, checked the drainage, reviewed the vitals. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, Patterson said. Perfect placement. Ideal drainage rate. This is textbook emergency decompression. He looked at Jake. Was this you? Yes, sir. In a flying aircraft? In Arctic conditions? Yes, sir. Patterson stared at him. That's the most impressive field medicine I've ever seen. You saved her life, Doctor. Whitmore. No question. Henderson was there, and Foster, and Stone, and a crowd of medical personnel who'd gathered to witness the impossible rescue. Jake stood there in his blood-stained clothes, exhausted, barely able to stand. Jake, Henderson said quietly, I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you about 100 apologies. I was wrong. About you. About your abilities. About everything. You were protecting your hospital. I understand. No, I was being a coward. Letting politics and fear override medical judgment. You showed me what real courage looks like. What real medicine looks like. Henderson extended his hand. Welcome back, Doctor. Whitmore. If you want it, you have a position here. Full medical privileges. Air rescue physician. The job you should have had all along. Jake shook his hand, too tired to process what was happening. Thank you, but I need to sleep for about 3 days first. Foster stepped forward, her competitive edge gone, replaced by respect. I was wrong too. What you did today, that wasn't luck or desperation. That was skill and courage and everything a physician should be. I'm sorry for what I said. Stone nodded. And I'm sorry for calling you a coward. You're anything but. You flew into conditions I wouldn't attempt. You saved a life I'd written off. That takes guts I don't have. Morgan put a hand on Jake's shoulder. Come on, hero. Let's get you checked out. You've been flying and operating for hours. You need rest. They walked toward the medical center, Jake's legs unsteady. Behind them, the twin otters sat on the tarmac, battered and empty and beautiful. Danny was already there, beginning the post-flight inspection, his face split in a huge grin. You did it. Danny shouted. You brought her back alive, Doctor. Whitmore, you're a legend. Jake managed a tired smile. Just did my job, kid. Same as you did yours by prepping that bird perfectly. 3 days later, Jake stood in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hands. He'd spent the last 72 hours in a blur of debriefings, medical reviews, and sleep that came in fits and starts, haunted by dreams of turbulence and blood and the weight of impossible choices. Sarah Chen was alive, not just alive, recovering. The neurosurgery team had completed the definitive repair of her aneurysm, and she was expected to make a full recovery. Her husband had flown up from Seattle with their children, and Jake had watched through a window as they'd been allowed to see her two small kids climbing carefully onto their mother's hospital bed, crying with relief and joy. He'd turned away before they could see him watching. Some moments were too private, too sacred for outsiders. There you are. Morrison found him staring out the window at the mountains. I've been looking for you. The hospital board wants to meet with you. About what? The unauthorized surgery? The violated protocols? About offering you the position Henderson mentioned. Head of Air Rescue Medicine. Full medical license reinstated. State Medical Board has already approved it based on your successful mission and my testimony about Afghanistan. Jake set down his cold coffee. Henry, I don't know if I can do this. Be a doctor again. Trust myself with lives again. What if next time I make the wrong call? You'll make the wrong call eventually. Every doctor does. That's not failure, that's being human. Morrison sat down beside him. But you'll also make 1,000 right calls. You'll save lives that no one else could save. You'll teach other doctors how to be brave when it matters. That's who you are, Jake. That's who you've always been. Matthew would have been better at this. He was always the brave one. Matthew was brave. So are you. But his bravery got him killed, and yours keeps you alive to save people. Neither is better, they're just different. Morrison pulled out a folder. I brought you something. The final report on Matthew's death. Classified until now, but I pulled some strings. Jake took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were after-action reports, intelligence briefings, photographs. He read through them slowly, each word a knife in his chest. Matthew's helicopter had been shot down while attempting to reach a source who claimed to have evidence about the general's corruption. But the mission had been compromised. Someone in the chain of command had leaked the flight plan to hostile forces. Matthew and his crew had flown into an ambush. But before he died, Matthew had transmitted a data burst. Evidence, witness statements, communications logs. Everything needed to prove Jake's innocence and the general's guilt. He did it, Jake whispered. He cleared my name. He died clearing your name, Morrison corrected gently. And that evidence led to the general's court-martial and conviction 3 years ago. Dishonorable discharge, prison time, justice, even if it came too late for you. I didn't know. No one told me. Because you were flying cargo in Alaska, trying to disappear. But Jake Matthew didn't die for nothing. He proved you were innocent. He proved you made the right calls under impossible conditions. He proved that you were exactly the surgeon everyone thought you were before politics destroyed you. Jake stared at the evidence report, at his brother's final gift. I wish I could thank him. You can. By being the doctor he knew you could be. By saving lives the way he knew you would. By honoring his memory with every impossible choice you make from here on out. Morrison stood. The board meeting is in an hour. They want your answer about the position. Think about what Matthew would want you to do. After Morrison left, Jake sat alone with his thoughts and his cold coffee and his brother's final message. Through the window, he could see the helicopter pad where rescue birds waited for their next mission. Could see the mountains where people would inevitably need help in impossible places. Could see the future stretching out full of risk and fear and the possibility of failure, but also full of life, of purpose, of the chance to be who he was meant to be. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a number he'd saved years ago but never called. Dr. Patricia Chen, Sarah's sister, who'd left angry voicemails after the rescue, demanding to know who'd saved her sister's life. The phone rang twice. Dr. Chen? This is Jacob Whitmore. I'm the physician who performed the emergency procedure on your sister. I wanted to check on how she's doing. And Dr. Whitmore. Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Sarah's awake. She's talking. She's going to live. And it's because of you. Because you were brave enough to try when everyone else had given up. I just did what needed to be done. You did what was impossible. The neurosurgeons here said the burr you created in a flying aircraft, in Arctic conditions, was placed with textbook precision. They said if you'd been off by even a few millimeters, she would have died. But you weren't. You were perfect. Patricia's voice caught. My niece and nephew still have their mother because of you. How do I thank someone for that? Jake's throat tightened. You don't need to thank me. Knowing she's alive is enough. No, it's not. Sarah wants to meet you. Her husband wants to shake your hand. Her children want to thank the doctor who saved their mommy. Will you come, please? Jake looked at the folder Morrison had left, at the evidence of his innocence, at his brother's final sacrifice, at the proof that he'd been right all along, that his choices in Afghanistan had been the best possible choices in an impossible situation. I'll come, he said. Tell Sarah I'll be there in an hour. The meeting with Sarah Chen and her family was everything Jake hadn't known he needed. Her children Emma and Lucas, for in 6 years old, had drawn pictures of helicopters and doctors. Her husband Michael had gripped Jake's hand with tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. And Sarah herself, pale but alive, had looked at him with an expression that Jake would carry with him forever. "Thank you," she'd said simply. "Thank you for not giving up on me." After they left, Jake made his way to the hospital board meeting. Henderson was there, and Foster, and Stone, and a dozen administrators and medical directors. They all stood when he entered. "Dr. Whitmore," the hospital CEO said, "we've reviewed your emergency mission in detail. The flight into dangerous conditions, the improvised surgical procedure, the successful patient outcome, and we've reached a unanimous decision." Jake braced himself. This was where they'd tell him that despite the success, they couldn't overlook the risks, the protocols violated, the liability concerns. "We want to offer you the position of Director of Air Rescue Medicine, full medical privileges, staff surgeon status, and we want to establish a new training program, the Whitmore Protocol for Extreme Environment Medicine. You develop curriculum, train physicians, and lead missions when needed." Jake stared. "You want me to train other doctors? We want you to teach them what you know. How to make impossible choices. How to improvise under pressure. How to be brave when it matters." Henderson stepped forward. "Jake, you're the best emergency physician I've ever seen. What you did in that aircraft, that's the future of rescue medicine. We need you to show us how. And if I fail, if I make a mistake, then you fail surrounded by people who believe in you, who know you'll learn from it and be better next time." Foster's voice was sincere. "We were wrong about you, Jake. All of us. Let us make it right." Jake thought about Matthew, about the soldiers he'd saved in Afghanistan, about Sarah Chen and her children, about all the lives he might save if he was brave enough to try. "I accept," he said, "on one condition." "Name it." "The program isn't named after me. It's named after my brother, the Matthew Whitmore Protocol. He's the one who never gave up, even when it cost him everything. He deserves to be remembered." Henderson smiled. "The Matthew Whitmore Protocol it is. Welcome back, Dr. Whitmore. Let's save some lives." 6 months later, Jake stood in front of 20 young physicians who'd enrolled in the first training cohort. They came from across the country: emergency medicine residents, military doctors, wilderness medicine specialists, all of them eager to learn how to practice medicine at the edge of the possible. "Welcome to the Matthew Whitmore Protocol," Jake began. "My brother believed that medicine wasn't about perfect conditions or unlimited resources. It was about doing your absolute best with what you have, where you are, for the people who need you. That's what we're going to teach you here." He pulled up a tactical display, a simulation of an emergency rescue scenario. 6 people trapped in remote terrain, limited supplies, hostile environment, multiple casualties, and you have to choose who gets treated first. Who gets the limited resources? Who do you try to save when you can't save everyone? The students shifted uncomfortably. These were the questions medical school didn't prepare you for. "These choices will haunt you," Jake continued. "I won't lie about that. The people you couldn't save, the decisions you second guess, the weight of playing God when you're just human. It never gets easier. But what does get easier is trusting yourself, trusting your training, knowing that you did everything possible even when it wasn't enough." A young resident raised her hand. "Dr. Whitmore, I read about Afghanistan, about what happened to you. How do you move forward after something like that? How do you trust yourself again?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "You don't move forward. You move through. You carry the weight. You honor the ones you lost by saving the ones you can. And you remember that making the hardest choice isn't failure, it's courage." He pulled up an image: Sarah Chen with her children, taken last month at her follow-up appointment. This woman was given up for dead. Every expert said she was unsavable. But we tried anyway. And now she's alive. That's why we do this. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for the chance, just the chance to give someone more time with the people they love. The training continued for 3 intensive months. Jake taught them Arctic medicine, mountain rescue protocols, improvised surgical techniques. He taught them how to make hard choices, how to live with consequences, how to be brave when everything inside screamed to run away. Lisa Morgan became his partner in running the program, bringing her years of field experience. Danny Miller enrolled as a student, earning his emergency medical technician certification while maintaining the aircraft. Even Henderson participated, teaching the administrative and legal aspects of extreme environment medicine. But the most meaningful moment came on a cold December day, when Jake was invited to speak at the Military Medical Command. He stood in front of officers and combat surgeons, people who'd known him before the court-martial, before the fall. 10 years ago, he began, I made choices that destroyed my career, choices that got me court-martialed, imprisoned, dishonored. And for a long time, I believed I deserved all of it, that I was exactly the failure everyone said I was. He paused, looked around the room. But I was wrong. I wasn't a failure. I was a surgeon who made the best possible decisions in an impossible situation, who saved 8 lives while losing 4, who did his job under conditions that would have broken most people. He pulled up the evidence report Morrison had given him. My brother Matthew died proving that. He gave his life to show that I was innocent, that the general who destroyed me was corrupt, that the system failed, not me. Jake's voice strengthened. I'm telling you this because some of you will face the same thing. You'll make a hard call. You'll lose a patient. Someone will blame you for circumstances beyond your control. And you'll wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are a failure. He looked at each face in the room. But you're not. You're healers working in hell. You're making impossible choices with impossible odds. And the fact that you try, that you risk everything to save lives, that makes you heroes. Don't ever forget that. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, a young combat surgeon approached him, couldn't be more than 30, still idealistic, still believing medicine could save everyone. Sir, the surgeon said, I'm deploying to Syria next month, field hospital near the combat zone. I'm scared I'll have to make the kind of choices you made. How do I prepare for that? Jake put a hand on the young surgeon's shoulder. You can't prepare. You just do it. You trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust that doing your best is enough. And when you come home, because you will come home, you talk about it. You don't carry it alone. You find people who understand. Promise me that. I promise, sir. Jake watched the young surgeon walk away, saw Matthew in him. The idealism, the courage, the willingness to run toward danger while others ran away. He reminds you of your brother, Morrison said, appearing beside Jake. Yeah, I hope he makes better choices than Matthew did. Lives longer. Comes home. Matthew made the right choice. He just paid too high a price for it. Morrison handed Jake a small box. Speaking of Matthew, this arrived today. From the military archives. Thought you should have it. Inside the box was a medal, the Silver Star, awarded posthumously to Matthew Whitmore for valor in combat. The citation detailed his final mission, his attempt to save Jake's reputation, his sacrifice. He earned 5 combat decorations, Morrison said quietly. But he always said the only medal that mattered was the one he couldn't win, proving his brother was innocent. Now he has both. Jake held the medal, feeling its weight. He would have hated this. The ceremony. The recognition. He just wanted to fly and save people. Like someone else I know. I miss him, Henry. Every day. Every time I fly, I feel like he should be there in the co-pilot seat, giving me grief about my landing technique. He is there, not in the seat, but with you. In every choice you make, every life you save, every impossible mission you attempt. That's his legacy, not the medal, but you. The surgeon you became because he believed in you. Jake pinned the medal to his jacket. Then I better make sure I'm worth believing in. The months turned into a year. The Matthew Whitmore Protocol graduated its first-class 20 physicians now equipped to practice medicine at the edges of the possible. They dispersed across the country and the world, carrying the lessons they'd learned. Jake continued flying rescue missions, now with full medical authority and a team that trusted him completely. He saved lives in impossible conditions: mountaintop extractions, ocean rescues, Arctic emergencies. Not every mission succeeded. Some patients died despite everything he tried. But the ones who lived, they lived because he'd been brave enough to try. Sarah Chen made a full recovery. She returned to her climate research. Though her husband made her promise to stay closer to civilization, she and her family visited Jake every few months, bringing updates and pictures and gratitude that never felt like enough but somehow was. Danny Miller became a full paramedic and Jake's regular co-pilot. Morgan was promoted to Chief of Air Rescue Operations. Henderson retired. recommending Jake as his replacement, an offer Jake declined because he wanted to fly, not administrate. And on the first anniversary of Matthew's death, Jake flew to his brother's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. He placed the silver star on the headstone, along with a photo of the Whitmore Protocol's first graduating class. "We did it, Matt," Jake said quietly. "We built something that matters, something that saves lives, something that proves you were right all along, that the best surgeons are the ones brave enough to try when everyone else has given up." He stood in silence for a while, the wind cold against his face, the weight of a year's worth of missions and choices and lives pressing down on him. But it wasn't unbearable anymore, because he wasn't carrying it alone. He had his team, his students, the people he'd saved and the ones who'd saved him by believing when no one else would. The true courage wasn't in saving everyone, that was impossible. The true courage was in making the choice, in doing the impossible, in trying even when failure seemed certain. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes impossible was just another word for not yet achieved. Jake touched his brother's headstone one last time, then walked back to his car. He had a shift starting in 3 hours. Somewhere in Alaska, someone would need help in an impossible place. And Jake would fly there, because that's what Matthew would have done. That's what heroes did. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they flew toward danger anyway, carrying hope in their hands and courage in their hearts, believing that one more life saved was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every impossible choice. The parking lot was nearly empty except for one figure leaning against Jake's truck. Morrison, holding two coffee cups and smiling. "Thought you might need this," the colonel said, handing over one cup. "And some company. Thanks, Henry, for everything, for believing in me when no one else did. That's what brothers do. And make no mistake, Jake, you're my brother now, just like Matthew was. That bond doesn't break just because one of us is gone." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, to old soldiers finding peace among the graves of heroes. "You know what Matthew told me," Morrison said eventually, right before his last mission. "He said his biggest fear wasn't dying, it was that you'd give up, that you'd let the guilt destroy you, that you'd forget you were a healer. I almost did give up, but you didn't. You kept going. You flew cargo for 10 years, waiting for your chance. And when it came, you were ready. That's not giving up, Jake. That's the longest, hardest kind of courage there is, the courage to keep breathing when everything hurts. I still miss him. You're supposed to. That's how you know the love was real." Morrison finished his coffee. "But he wouldn't want you stuck here, talking to a stone. He'd want you in the air, saving lives, being the surgeon he always knew you were. So come on. I'll drive you to the hospital. You've got lives to save and impossible things to accomplish." They drove back through Arlington, past rows of white headstones marking heroes and helpers and people who'd made hard choices. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and temporary and perfect. Like life, like courage, like the chances we take when we choose to try. And somewhere in the Alaska wilderness, someone was waiting for a rescue that seemed impossible, waiting for a helicopter to appear through the storm, waiting for a doctor brave enough to fly when everyone else stayed grounded. Dr. Jacob Whitmore was on his way.